Welcome to the new season of SAFT Podcast. It seems like yesterday we completed season 4, and today we are here starting season 5. And Jacob, you look really great. And I can see that it's been quite a few months, and I guess we have changed a bit. But
Yeah.
jokes aside, um, you look good as always. But then we're really glad to be back, and I'm sure that our audience was waiting to hear back from the SAFT duo. And today we are back again with continuing our series on natural theology. So let's just see what's there in store for us today. But before that, we are really excited because this year on June 1st, we are completing 4 years of SAFT. It seems like yesterday when we just started at our university, but we are glad to be here and we really praise God how far He has brought us. So, Jacob, how are you doing? And how's everything going on at your end?
Yeah, man. It's just so amazing to come back and do the podcast. I think we did the last one in December. I think the last one that we both worked together was sometime in October. Then we had 3 guest
Yeah.
episodes. So it's actually been a while. The while since the both of us came on for the Fact podcast, and yeah, you two look great. I know you said all of that just to hear that back. Uh, uh,
Okay.
and and like you said, time has flown by so fast. The 4 years, or even the last months that we were off the podcast air. There's a lot of things working behind the scene. A lot of projects in pipeline. Uh, a lot of our audience may be wondering, where is Areopagus 2020? Three was that happening along? So I know some of you are expecting the Areopagus project to be back. Yes, we want to bring that back, but again, we have diversified a lot in the work that we're doing. You can check out blog.saftapologetics.com, our brand new blog, and we are pulling together content from different platforms. We have begun our response video. We'll drop a link to that in the description. And we're working on an ebook, which is very exciting project for us, bringing together five speaking team members, 5 team members at SAFT, and another guest friend of ours. Um, it's sort of like an international work spread across 3 different countries. The writing team members they're from, and then we are working on a pamphlet. We released our first ever pamphlet, and then we want to work on a couple more and network with different churches and ministries in India to start off with, to make these pamphlets on apologetics out there for everyone to use that as a tool for evangelism. So there's a lot of things happening behind the scene, and we need all the more resources, especially human resources, to help us take this further. We are on the lookout for some more help with video editing and graphic designing. So if you are a person who has an interest, passion, and a heart to join us and help us in video editing or on the graphic designing end, do email us at ankit@saftapologetics.com. Again, the link is in the description. And with that, I think it would be just a good point to recap what we've been doing in the series. As Peach mentioned, we have been looking at the natural theology series, looking at arguments for God's existence. And we did the Kalam cosmological argument, which was arguing for a cause behind the beating of the universe. And then we
Yeah.
delved into, what is the nature of that cause? Is that just some sort of power or some force of physics out there? And 2 of our guest episodes just before we concluded season 4 was addressing and delving more into it. Asher John and Ashish John from the Carpenter's Desk were on SAFT Podcast, and we dived a bit into it. And now we will be looking to explore something further. We've done the Kalam cosmological argument. It's time to move on to the next one and pick up the series.
Yeah. So before we move ahead, I really hope that our audience do remember what the Kalam cosmological argument was, because we had repeated it again and again and again. So by now, you all should have by hearted, right? But still, for a recap, Jacob, what is the Kalam cosmological argument?
Yeah, so the Kalam cosmological argument says everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. So, pretty simple
Right.
to
Yeah.
learn, and that's what it is.
Yes. So now we'll be moving on to another argument which we'll be focusing on, and this is known as the moral argument. So let's just not have any further delays and straight off dive into it. So, Jacob, help us to know what is this moral argument.
Yeah. So the moral argument focus on now. As you hear the term moral and argument, you may get an idea about, okay, is this an argument that is trying to make sense or use our understanding of morality, our understanding of good and bad, our understanding of right and wrong. And you would be right to think that. Yes, the moral argument looks to present the case that our understanding of the moral realm, our understanding of the moral order that we find ourselves to inhabit, points towards a moral lawgiver. And the argument is to basically put forward that it points towards the fact that God is where we end up with when we explore the whole framework of our morality. And the one of the strengths of the moral argument is that it's been said that it is quite effective at a college going group. And I think the reason is that because when you're in colleges, you are driven by a lot of activism. You're spurred by maybe your concepts of social justice. You want to reduce the societal structures and institutions.
Right.
You are deeply angered by social evil. Again, a lot of activism mentality, and that's a great thing to a lot of extent. You are moved within your heart. You have a fire in your bosom to actually change the society that you are in for the better. And so the moral argument is quite effective in that college going group, that age bracket that I and Piyush, we both find ourselves in.
Yeah.
In that age bracket, we are driven by our understanding that this world is broken, that this world is in shatters, and there's a lot of evil and unwanted stuff going on around us, and we want to change it. Right? We realize that this is not how the world should be, and we're driven by an understanding of how the world ought to be. And so the moral argument taps into that and says, okay, well, you say that the world ought to be this way, and it ought to be this way for everyone. Why is that the case? Where are you grounding it? What is your foundation for it? And why should your understanding of how the world ought to be superseding or superior to someone else contradicting understanding of how the world ought to be? If there are two contradictory positions on how the world ought to be, what comes out on top? And all of this would play into our understanding of how we develop the moral argument and how we present the moral argument. But then again, that's a whole lot of things to explore over the couple of episodes that are coming up.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's very true. Like as you mentioned, that this argument is very important for us, especially. I mean, those who are college going. I mean, I know right now I'm graduating, but still, I know what you meant because I have had such encounters with people at my college. But then, since we're talking on these grounds, I think our audience should check out the SAFT Encounters. Those were some of the first videos we had in the beginning. So over there we had interviews with some students and what they think about morality. So we'll put the link in the description so you can go and check those out as well. Now, talking about moral argument, there are some names which which really pop up in our heads, like Thomas Aquinas, then William Sorley, and David Paget. So, Jacob, can you tell us that how prominent are these names in the history of moral argument?
Right. So, and that would be a good segue to understanding where the moral argument comes from and where it is right now in this state of Christian apologetics and the academic world of Christian apologetics. So Thomas Aquinas is a name that is quite familiar to us, especially on the podcast. We had looked at Aquinas' cosmological argument when we were rebutting Crash Course. We were talking about Thomas Aquinas, and they were mentioning about Thomas Aquinas' arguments, and we referred to it, looked into it. And in other terms, also, if you are completely unfamiliar to the videos that we've done before, and if this is the first time you're watching SAFT Podcast or listening to SAFT Podcast, You might be familiar to the name Thomas Aquinas, a very prominent Christian theologian. And the other name that you mentioned, right, William Solly, that is maybe sort of like an elusive name an archaic name that you're hearing for the first time. But then again, David Bucket also would be a name that you would be hearing for the first time. So Thomas Aquinas' connection to the moral argument comes in that Aquinas presented 5 arguments, his most famous 5 arguments for the existence of God. And these include things like, things are in motion, and so there must be something that is not in motion that set everything in motion. That's sort of a set of arguments. And one of the argument, if I recollect, it is the 4th argument in his 5 argument list, points towards the fact that there is actually a gradation, there is actually a degree or a spectrum of things that you can put things on. So it would mean that there are things that are good, there are things that are noble, and there would be things that are more good or more noble than the things that you pointed out earlier. And Thomas Aquinas' point was that as you go on this grade, this scale, this spectrum, you would find things that are more good, you would find things that are more noble, and so on and so forth. And so eventually you would reach that point or that thing which is, the best thing and the most noblest thing that there is. And so this is sort of where you would find a root of the moral argument, right? It is pointing towards the best thing out there, the greatest good thing out there, the most noblest thing out there. And Thomas Aquinas' point was to then say that this best, most noblest, greatest good thing of sort out there is God. So that is sort of like a very brief overview of the moral argument. Again, I won't put that as the most accurate representation of Thomas Aquinas' work, because his work is quite complex and a lot to deal with and grasp with. But this sort of gives you a gist of where Thomas Aquinas' understanding and his contribution towards the moral argument comes when we ask the question of what is the history of the moral argument. Then the other name that you mentioned is William Solly. So he was a professor, if I recall, at Cambridge University, and in his one of set of his lectures, he presented and sort of developed or put forth for the first time, if I may say so, the moral argument that we are quite familiar with. And what he does is that he says that God is what gives a grounding for a rational view of the natural and moral order that we find in reality. So there is a natural order out there that talks about nature and laws of physics and force of nature and so on and so forth. And then there is a moral order out there. And his proposition was that, his statement that he put forward was that, the position that he presented and defended in that lecture series was that it is in God, or it is when we come to hold the belief of a God that exists, that we have a unified understanding, a rationally unified understanding of holding together a natural and moral order. And it is in God, it is in our understanding of God that we hold together this unified understanding of a natural and moral order. So William Solly's work is sort of seen as sort of like the breakthrough work in developing and presenting a moral argument. Then comes the third name that you mentioned, David Bucket. He is now a professor at Houston Baptist University, and he is considered as the world's leading expert on the moral argument. And David Bucket's moral argument takes a form of an abductive reasoning and sort of like an inference to the best explanation. So he lists out his argument and says that God is the best explanation of our understanding or of the moral framework that we come to hold. And that sort of gives you, like, I think, sort of like an overview of the history of the moral argument. You start off with Thomas Aquinas, his 4th argument in his 5 argument series of saying there is a gradation, a spectrum. You move from good to more good to the best out there, and therefore God is that best. And so you're looking at, when you say good, noble, more noble, you're speaking on a moral plane, on a moral within a moral paradigm. That was Thomas Aquinas' work. Then William Solly, his work pointed towards that in God you find the best, the most rational, unified explanation and understanding of the natural order and the moral order. And then David Bucket world's leading expert on the moral argument. And if you want to know more about the moral argument in depth, there are books out there. But a quick resource that you can check out is moralapologetics.com. And David Bucket does his mailbox answer series in handling questions from the audience and listeners. And his sort of work is seen as the pioneering front of at the cutting edge of development in the moral argument section within the philosophical work from. So yeah, that sort of gives you a quick overview.
Okay, so I mean, we can put those links in the description, so our audience who might be interested, they can go and take a look at it. Okay, so as you mentioned that all three of these personalities, they had different things to bring to the table related to the moral argument. So as we look forward to this, talking about this moral argument, what type of moral argument are we going to look at?
Right. So, as I mentioned, David Bucket's moral argument looks at an inference to the best explanation, an abductive way of doing it. And the moral argument structure that we are looking at is, and I think we can also sort of give you a bird's eye and introduce you to David Bucket's presentation once we finish the deductive form of it. Hey, maybe God willing, maybe we can even have David Bucket himself come on the podcast and explain on his presentation. So the one that we are looking at is a deductive form. Now, those who are familiar with the field of philosophy and apologetics, or if you have been listening to our natural theology series, you would immediately say, "Aha, deductive." Where have I come across that? So the deductive way of an argumentation is where you have statements, or as we call them, premises, and then you come to a conclusion. And you reach that conclusion if the logic connecting statements or the premises are valid, and if the premises or the statements are true. So two conditions, if you satisfy both those conditions, then you come inevitably to the conclusion. So it is sort of like an airtight argumentation style. So we are looking at the deductive style of the moral argument, which you would be familiar with from the works of Dr. William Lane Craig. And so the structure of this deductive form of moral argument is that if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. The second statement is objective moral values and duties do exist. And therefore we come to the conclusion, therefore God exists. To say it again, if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. Statement number 2, objective moral values and duties do exist. And therefore we come to the conclusion, therefore God exists. So now what we have to see is the logic connecting these both statements true, the first and the second one? And then, is it true that if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist? And is it also true that objective moral values and duties do exist? But then I think that's something for us to look at in the upcoming episodes.
Yeah, right. Thank you, Jacob, for helping us understand what we'll be looking at in this season as we focus on moral argument. And like last time, by the second or third episode, all our audience and us, we were well versed with what the Kalam cosmological argument is. So we'll keep repeating what the moral argument is, and I'm sure that by the third episode, I hope, all of us will know. I mean, if someone asks you, you'll be able to say what we are looking at. And thank you for tuning in today. So this is what we'll be focusing on in this season. And there's a lot which has been happening with us, as Jacob mentioned in the start of this podcast. So if you want to know more about it, if you want to check them out, you can go ahead and check out the updates on our website. And then we are pretty active on social media, so you can DM us to know more, and you can follow us so that you stay updated. And so that's it from our side from this episode, and we really hope to see you soon in the next one. Till then, stay safe, take care, and have a great week.